Chapter 13. The Conquest of Rabies. Louis Pasteur returned to the laboratory to take aim at another killer. He had cured diseases of silkworms, chickens, and livestock. Now he wanted to conquer a disease of humans. He chose rabies as his target. Rabies is a fatal disease that can attack most mammals, but it is found most often in dogs and wolves. A dog or wolf with rabies displays unmistakable signs of the disease: a half-open mouth, froth-covered jaws, bloodshot eyes, and sad, mournful howls. Rabies was also known as hydrophobia. Louis explained to his wife the reason for that name. Louis said, "Rabies attacks the central nervous system. A dog drinks water by lapping it up with his tongue. Once rabies strikes, a dog cannot control his tongue. The poor animal becomes terribly thirsty, yet is absolutely unable to drink. The mere sight of water sends the pitiful animal into a frenzy of torment. For that reason, the disease is also known as hydrophobia. The word means fear of water." "How do humans get the disease?" his wife asked. "There is only one way," Louis said. "A human must be bitten by the infected animal." Only a few hundred people in France died from the disease each year. However, the dreadful nature of rabies caused great terror. It struck without warning, turning a normally peaceful and friendly dog into a vicious killer. "Human victims who die of the disease suffer through horrible convulsions," Louis said. "I cannot forget the terror caused in Arbois by a rabid wolf. It happened 50 years ago when I was 12 years old. The mad wolf came down from the mountains in October 1836. In all, he attacked several people, and 8 of them died of rabies. What can be done to treat the disease?" Marie asked. "People have tried all kinds of treatments for the disease," Louis said. "One method is to apply a red-hot poker to the wound." Louis had been on hand when the blacksmith treated one of the victims. Louis watched outside the blacksmith shop near his father's house. The blacksmith cauterized, burned, the victim's wounds with a red-hot iron. "Does it work?" his wife asked. "It is extremely painful, of course," Louis said, "but taking this step immediately after the attack does seem to help." The treatment with a hot iron yielded imperfect results. If a doctor didn't treat the wounds quickly enough or thoroughly enough and the disease developed, then nothing could save the victim. People feared rabies for the very good reason that the disease always proved fatal. A person bitten by a mad dog didn't always get the disease. Those who did sometimes didn't get ill for several days or even weeks. But once the symptoms developed, there was no hope. In all of history up to Pasteur's time, not a single person survived once the disease made its appearance. Louis called his assistants together. He explained why he chose a cure for rabies as his next goal. In the public mind, Louis said, "Rabies represents the worst disease that can befall a person. If we can find a cure for it, we will prove that doctors can use our methods to overcome any infectious disease." "Where shall we begin?" Emile Roux asked. Louis said, "We must first identify the germ that causes the disease." Emile Roux said, "Doctors believe the saliva of mad dogs contains the microbe that causes rabies." Louis cautioned, "I learned long ago to check even the most well-established fact when it came to diseases. Build cages for mad dogs and bring them to the laboratory. We will test this information ourselves." His assistants rounded up some rabid dogs. 2 of his assistants pulled a mad bulldog from its cage. They roped it with a lasso and stretched the struggling, ferocious animal on a table. They held the animal while Louis collected a few drops of foamy saliva from its jaws. Louis Pasteur and Emile Roux transmitted the disease by inoculating a dog under the skin with the saliva from the mad dog. Several weeks passed before the animal became sick. Suddenly, it began darting at anything that came near it. It chewed at the bars of its cage. It tore its bed apart. The dog's tongue became covered with froth, and its eyes turned bloodshot. The sound of its haunting howl filled the laboratory. Uncontrolled spasms shook its body. Then the animal died. The dog died from rabies, proving that the saliva of the mad bulldog contained the rabies microorganism. However, further tests led to conflicting results. Sometimes an animal injected with saliva became sick and died, but not of rabies. It died of some other disease. We should not find that surprising, Louis told his assistants. A rabid animal bites everything in sight, picking up germs in its mouth. When we take the froth from its jaws, we get not only the rabies germ, but other germs too. What can we do to avoid that problem? Emile Roux asked. Louis said, the nervous system is the home of the agent that causes rabies. We shall remove part of the brain or spinal column of an animal that has died of rabies. We'll inject that material into a test animal. This method gave better results. After injecting a dog with brain material, it would eventually die of rabies. However, weeks or even months might pass before the disease took its toll. Why does it take so long for rabies to develop? Emile wondered. Louis had the answer. Germs may enter the body from bites to the arms or legs or from our inoculations. The germs must make their way to the brain and grow there before the disease takes hold. The long incubation time of rabies tried the experimenter's patience. Emile Roux grew discouraged. We must wait months to see the results of our experiments. How can we learn anything under such conditions? How can we make the disease develop more quickly? Louis saw one solution. Suppose he inoculated rabid material directly on the surface of a healthy dog's brain. This would speed up the infection timetable. Louis drew back at such a thought. It would mean drilling a hole in the skull of a living animal. Just the idea caused him to shudder. Emile noticed Louis Pasteur's preoccupation. You have an idea? Louis said, we could take brain tissue from an animal that died of rabies and put it into the brain of another animal. But I hesitate to try that idea. Emile Roux knew why Louis hesitated. Louis Pasteur had a horror of inflicting suffering, whether in humans or animals. During experiments, if an animal squealed in pain, Louis tried to comfort the subject. He would stroke the animal, trying to console it. Emile Roux said, I can chloroform the animal and it will feel nothing. The operation is simple. Still, Louis Pasteur hesitated. His gentle nature prevented him from telling his assistant to go ahead with the experiment. One day, while Louis was away, Emile chloroformed a dog. Then he used a special tool to drill a small hole in the skull. He injected a small quantity of rabid matter directly on the brain. Then he washed the wound with carbolic solution and stitched the skin over the hole. Once the dog regained consciousness, it appeared to be completely well. The next day, Emile confessed to Louis Pasteur, I performed the experiment while you were away. The poor animal. Louis cried. His brain is no doubt injured. He must be paralyzed. Emile did not answer. Instead, he went for the dog and led him into the laboratory. The dog trotted in briskly and began sniffing around, wagging its tail. Louis could hardly contain his delight. Dogs were not his favorite pets. He adored little pigs, which he found incredibly cute. However, he dropped to one knee and began patting and hugging this dog. Good boy, he said over and over. This dog developed rabies in only 2 weeks, far quicker than ever before. Within 17 days, the animal died of the disease. Now Louis expected to make real progress since he could do experiments more quickly. Louis tried to follow the steps that spelled success so many times before. First, find the germ. Next, learn how to grow it outside the body. Finally, develop a weakened form to make a vaccine. Yet, Louis could not find the germ. No matter how carefully he searched or how high a magnification he set his microscope, he could not find the germ. The microbe was so small it could pass through the pores of Charles Chamberlain's finest porcelain filters. Louis told his assistants, we must conclude that an agent much smaller than a bacteria causes rabies. He called the rabies agent a virus. Nor could Louis grow the invisible rabies virus outside the body of a living animal. Virus only grew within a living cell. Louis chose rabbits as the host. When one rabbit died, he transmitted the disease to another one. Emile Roux grew more and more discouraged. If we can't see the rabies virus and we can't grow it outside the body, then will the final step fail, too? Will we be able to weaken it and make a vaccine? Louis waved aside his concern. There will be a way, Louis said. In one experiment, he removed the spinal cord of a rabbit that had died of rabies. He hung the spinal cord by a thread in a clean jar and kept the material hot and dry. As the days passed, the virus slowly lost strength. After 14 days, the strength of the rabies virus had faded so that it no longer caused the disease. Louis crushed the dried spinal cord, mixed it with pure water, and injected it into a dog. The dog showed no ill effects. Louis applied the dried rabies material in reverse. He injected a dog with material 14 days old, then 10 days old, and so on. After 14 days, he injected the dog with rabies material only a day old. The day-old material should have caused death in the test animal. Instead, no rabies appeared. The dog had become immune to rabies. Louis pointed out to his assistants that they'd made a vaccine of a virus that they couldn't see. The important scientific fact, he said, is that it is entirely possible to prepare a vaccine against an infectious disease without finding the microbe, without being able to separate and grow it. In May 1884, the Minister of Public Instruction appointed a commission on rabies. Two of its members were Felix Vulpian and Joseph Grandshare. Felix Vulpian was an expert on the nervous system. Dr. Grandshare was a practicing physician. These men reviewed Louis Pasteur's work and supervised a test, similar to the livestock test of anthrax. The members of the commission set down the conditions of the test. In this test, you will use two groups of animals. One group will be treated with the rabies vaccine. The other group will receive no treatment. Then both groups will be injected with the rabies virus. Louis agreed to the commission's conditions. The untreated rabbits and dogs will develop rabies within 12 to 15 days, Louis said. The other animals, those treated following the schedule of vaccinations, will not develop it at all, no matter how long we keep them under observation. The test for the Rabies Commission took all of Louis Pasteur's time. Although he had men working with him, he checked their findings personally. Louis told his wife, "I must leave nothing to chance." That same month, in May, on the night of their wedding anniversary, Marie Pasteur wrote to her children, "Your father is absorbed in his thoughts, talks little, sleeps little, rises at dawn." In other words, he continues the life I began with him this day 35 years ago. After the test, the commission agreed that Louis Pasteur had found an effective way to prevent rabies. Vaccinating an animal with a weakened form of rabies material would protect it from the disease. However, the commission pointed out a major problem. "Do you really hope to vaccinate all of the dogs in Paris?" they asked. 100,000 dogs live in the city alone, and more than 2 million roam throughout France. The task of vaccinating them is too enormous. "Yes, you are right," Louis admitted. Not only could any of millions of domestic animals carry rabies, but so could wolves, skunks, bats, and other wild animals. An army of doctors would be unable to vaccinate all of these animals. While he puzzled about this, Louis made himself available to help those with questions about rabies. He answered letters from private individuals and spoke to public gatherings. At one meeting, a person asked, "Can rabies suddenly appear in an animal? You mean as if by spontaneous generation?" Louis asked, "No, rabies never appears if the animal has not been bitten. This explains why rabies is unknown in some countries. Australia, for instance, has no rabies. The government there quarantines for several months every dog coming into the country. This gives ample time for the disease to develop. If the dog carries rabies, he will not be released to infect other animals." The fact that rabies from a dog bite took so long to develop offered Louis the clue he needed. He reasoned, the virus must make its way to the brain before it does its damage. A vaccine given after a bite can still produce immunity in time to prevent the outbreak of the disease. In 1885, Louis set his goal. Louis told his assistants, "We shall prove that dogs can be rendered immune to rabies after they have been bitten by a mad dog. We'll not vaccinate the test animal before it gets the disease. We'll vaccinate the victim after it has been bitten. What I want to do is to obtain protection from rabies after bites. It will be a race against time Pasteur's vaccine against the spreading rabies virus. How long could a victim wait after being bitten to begin the anti-rabies treatment? No one knew. We must make many more tests before we dare use it on human patients," Louis told his assistants. Before they could conduct the series of tests, 3 unexpected visitors changed their plans. On Monday, July 6th, 1885, three people appeared at the laboratory. One of the visitors was a small boy, wrapped in bandages. His mother carried him. A worried man stood, waiting with the woman and boy. The woman explained why she came. "We are from Alsace, Monsieur Pasteur. As my little boy walked to school, a mad dog threw him to the ground. A bricklayer saw the attack from a distance and ran to his rescue. He beat the dog off, but not before my son was badly mauled." The mother continued, "The town doctor, Dr. Weber, heard of your work. Take your son to Paris at once, Dr. Weber told me. Take him to Louis Pasteur." The man with them was Theodore Vaughan, a grocer in the town where the boy lived. "The dog belonged to me," Theodore Vaughan said. "He came home and bit me on the arm. I grabbed a gun and shot the animal. Hay, straw, and pieces of wood filled his stomach, which shows that he was rabid." Louis nodded. "In their biting stage, rabid dogs would eat all sorts of things." Theodore Vaughan said, "He only bit me on the arm." Dr. Weber said, "I have nothing to worry about." Louis inspected the man's wound. "I agree with your doctor," Louis said. "Your coat and shirt sleeve wiped off the dog's saliva, and the teeth didn't penetrate your skin. You can safely go back to Alsace." The mother asked, "What can you do for my son?" "My remedy is untried and possibly dangerous," Louis Pasteur told the woman. "I'm not ready to try it on a human being." "Dr. Weber believes my son is doomed unless you treat him," she said. With gentle hands, Louis Pasteur examined her 9-year-old son, whose name was Joseph Meister. Deep gashes covered his body. The wounds were so bad the brave little boy could hardly walk. Still, Louis Pasteur hesitated. This would be his first human patient. "I simply can't take action without first seeking expert medical opinion," Louis told the woman. "The Paris Rabies Commission meets this afternoon at 5 o'clock. Please bring your son back at that time." The mother and child were alone in Paris. Louis ordered his household staff to prepare a meal for them. He arranged for a room so they could rest until the meeting with the commission. That evening, Felix Vulpian and Joseph Grandshare examined the boy in detail. The doctors gave their verdict. "The wounds are very deep. The only treatment he received was washing with carbolic solution, and that more than 10 hours after the attack. There is no other choice," they told Louis. "The boy will die if nothing is done." "Then I shall go ahead with the rabies inoculations," Louis Pasteur decided. Emile Roux could not accept that decision. He'd been Louis Pasteur's faithful assistant for many years. "I simply cannot bear the tension of another experiment where so much is at stake," he told Louis. Emile Roux walked away from the laboratory. On July 7th, 1885, 60 hours after the attack, Louis Pasteur began the treatment. Dr. Joseph Grandshare vaccinated the boy. Louis could not do it himself because he had no license to practice medicine. They began with material weakened by drying for 14 days. Dr. Grandshare inserted it under the skin of the abdomen. The boy cried until he received the pin prick of the inoculation. Then he dried his tears. This they followed with 12 more injections, each one stronger than the one before. During this time, the boy's wounds improved so he could walk around. Louis took him to the laboratory to visit the animals: chickens, rabbits, mice, and guinea pigs. The boy felt at home with the farm animals. He ran about quite happy. At night, Joseph Meister slept peacefully. Louis Pasteur, on the other hand, could attend to nothing else but the little boy. He sat by Joseph Meister's bed. He ate little and slept hardly at all. Finally, on July 16th, they injected Joseph Meister with material from the spinal cord of a rabbit that had died of rabies only the day before. It contained a full-strength virus. Even if the mad dog hadn't given Joseph Meister rabies, the last injection would give it to him anyway. Louis spent a night of torment. He dreamed that Joseph Meister was dying a horrible, suffocating death as rabies took over. Marie Pasteur wrote, "My dear children, your father has had another bad night. He is dreading the effects of the last inoculations. And yet there is no drawing back now." As the days passed, Joseph Meister showed no ill effects. With the treatment completed, Louis sent the boy home. Louis wrote to Dr. Weber in Alsace. Louis requested that the doctor write every other day to keep him informed of the boy's progress. On August 3rd, 1885, Louis could tell his assistants, "Very good news on the lad. It is 31 days since he was bitten. He remains free of the disease." Emile Roux returned to the laboratory. A few weeks later, Louis Pasteur delivered a report to the Academy of Science. The title, Method of Preventing Rabies After a Bite, told the story. Louis said, "Today, 3 months and 3 weeks after the accident, the health of Joseph Meister leaves nothing to be desired." Louis Pasteur's first patient, Joseph Meister, became the first human being to escape the certain death of rabies.